Hey, welcome to another Fundamental Friday. My name is Tyler Bourne. I'm the lead concept artist working with Tyler Edlin at Brushsaw Studio. Today we're going to start looking at some design fundamentals with a really fun exercise, and we're also going to start looking at building our visual library, which will help us with these design projects. If you like what you see today, Tyler Edlin's class, The Fundamentals of Design at CJMA, goes into this sort of thing in much greater detail, so definitely check that out. The link will be in the description below. So what we're doing today is mashing up two different ideas. And typically when we're doing this, I personally find it helpful to have one of the objects act as sort of the driving force behind the design. So let's look at some student examples. So here you can see we've mashed up a chair and a pineapple. But the primary function of this is a chair, and it's receiving the trappings or stylings of a pineapple. Here we've got this fun little vindictive bishop inspired by the shape and silhouette of a gas canister. These shape explorations are so fun, but of course primarily it is a character. Here we've got a little scooter type vehicle styled after a tape measure, and here we've got a little robot rabbit based on a speaker. So what I thought might be fun to mash up today is a mosquito and power tools. Maybe there's some kind of man-made mosquito that flies around to collect blood samples or something. This admittedly isn't the most original idea. It's basically going to be just a plastic mosquito, but it's just a fun exercise. So these are the two main objects, but as we flesh out our idea a little bit, we might need to include a few other things. So here's my reference board with some mosquitoes and some power tools. But thinking about the function, maybe this is an actual drill. Depending on the scale of this thing, maybe it's huge and is for drilling oil or something. So it might need some heavy duty, like heavy machinery drills to be able to dig into the earth, or at least some sort of drill bit here. In the end, I scrapped this idea. We're going to just keep it simple, but just to show you if that's a problem we need to solve, then get reference of that stuff. In the end, I chose to just keep it needle-like, so instead I grabbed some reference of some syringes. And of course my little robot mosquito thing is going to need some articulation. So here I'm looking at some robotic arms for the robotic joints. There are different types of joints, and they may need some hydraulics to help them articulate. In this case, these are electric joints, so all the mechanisms are in the joints themselves. And then how's this thing storing fluids? So we've got a container of some kind. So I was looking at trucks that deliver some sort of fluid or gas. We could potentially have some sort of expandable bladder made out of rubber or something like that. So I pulled up some of this thing from Horizon Zero Dawn. And of course, a mosquito with the styling of a power tool with, these interesting color combinations here. We're going to get something that probably looks like a wasp. So I also pulled up some wasps here. So we've got our main two things along with any other problem solving items we might have. Now we have an opportunity to study them, which will help build up our visual library and help us design this thing. The mosquito is going to be my main base, so I'm mostly after the overall forms and functions of a mosquito. In order to study that, I'm going to break it down into simple shapes. So first off, we've got this really nice curved line of action here. Mosquitoes have a really hunched over posture, which I really like. So we get that. The thorax is sort of this rounded tombstone form, and it tapers inwards at the bottom where it meets the legs. So something like this. Now I'm going to call the head a teardrop shape. So something sort of like this, and of course the real thing has more details, but if we're breaking this down into only simple shapes, I'm calling it a simple teardrop shape. And then of course the abdomen is basically just a cylinder with some segmented parts. And the legs are thin little cylinders. The reason I'm breaking it down like this is to help retain it in my visual library. It's harder to remember all the random little details. It's easier to remember larger archetypes. Insect bodies are basically three things: the head, the thorax, and abdomen. So three shapes. And then the legs, which are just sticks. So that's a lot easier to remember than all the little details. It helps us understand what the form is, it helps us understand it in three-dimensional space, and it helps us remember this stuff more easily. These simple shapes can be anything you want them to be, as long as it helps you understand. So there's not really a right or wrong, but try to keep it as simple as possible, since that will make it easier to remember, which means it will be easier to recall if you want to design something in the future. It'll be in the back of your brain there somewhere. Now we do something similar with the power tools, except now I'm less concerned with the overall form and function. Of course, we could study the forms. These are designed to fit a human hand, so that could be very important. But since the mosquito is going to be my base, I don't have to worry about it fitting into a human hand. I'm mostly after the aesthetics of drills and other tools, the plastic casings. And while there are some angular bits happening here, we do start to see some more hints at more organic shapes. We get these two colors and materials hugging each other. They've clearly been designed and modeled to fit together, and that's what makes them feel manufactured. In this example, I'm studying the tools, but I'm being somewhat loose about it. I'm not copying one for one, I'm not sketching an entire tool, just little sections that I'm seeing. And unlike the mosquito, where stance, proportions, and form were more important, now I'm not too concerned with getting those things right. As long as I get some of those surface shapes in there to make it look manufactured, then that's good enough for me. Again, there may be times when that stuff is really important to get right, but since I'm going to be applying what is essentially a surface material to a different form, that's really what I'm focused on here. Like the mosquito, we won't be able to retain all of this, so just do some sketches and try to get this overall vibe. Look at how this stuff fits together. If you can remember a few of the little details, then that's good. These little ridges which span across both materials, that allows us to fit a screw in there to fix these two pieces together. That's a nice little detail to note. Since we're going to have a needle or maybe some kind of drill, maybe we do a study of the section that is actually doing the drilling. And of course, if you need to brush up on robotic limbs and joints and stuff, it's a great idea to do so. Here we can see this simple hinge joint, which allows this whole piece to rotate this way. And the same thing here with this whole arm. We'd go back and would rotate around that point. And then this little cut line here indicates that this is two separate pieces, which tells us that this would rotate around like that, around this center axis. And the same thing here, this is probably some sort of rotation point. Possibly somewhere here where this dark material is as well. And even the base, we can see that this rotates around here. Again, studying this stuff and actually drawing it out will help you retain it in your visual library, and you can pull on this information in the future. So here I'm doing a few sketches of these robotic arms. I really struggle with mechanical things, so any chance I can, I try to do a little study of this kind of thing. In this particular example, I'm doing a study, so I am starting to worry a little bit about proportions and things like that, but I definitely don't get it super dialed in, and it's not necessarily the main focus. I'm mostly worried about representing the joints and trying to understand how these things fit together and move around. Okay, now that we've got our reference, we've broken things down into easy to remember shapes and added to our visual library, let's start actually designing. So I start off with loose gesture sketches of mosquitoes, just like I did with the real mosquitoes. You can also start to play with proportions here, maybe inject more of the silhouette shapes from the drill. Today I'm basically just making the mosquito shapes to take some of the thinking out of it for brevity's sake, but this is where you'd want to explore and play with different ideas. Now, as we start refining, I'm replacing the details from the mosquito bits with plastic and metal, with manufactured bits. Hopefully using some of that design language we looked at with the power tools. And have your reference up while doing this. We're basically looking at those design shapes and determining how to apply them onto those 3D forms we studied from the mosquito studies. We're basically just giving this little thing some new skin. So as I mentioned a moment ago, this is a good time to explore as many different ideas as you can. I didn't explore too many here. I was just sort of being quick about it and not putting too much time or thought into it. But as you'll see in the other examples, I made the proboscis, which is the mosquito's straw, essentially, the little mouthpiece that sucks up the blood. I put that in the mouth area on the head. But in this example, I want to change it up a little bit. So I put the needle coming out of the thorax instead. And of course, there is essentially a right angle happening there, which is not really how syringes work, but presumably this thing has some sort of little hydraulic or something that can suck up the liquid, and then it gets stored in the abdomen at the back. How it handles that right turn, I'm not exactly sure, but presumably there's some sort of pump system or something like that. It can go through tubing or something within the thorax, that center section. And if we had to figure that out to have it make more sense, that's something that we could further explore. But in these sort of first ideation sketches, that's something I can probably get away with. And here with the abdomen at the back, I sort of went in a slightly new direction. It's not necessarily a rubber bladder or an enclosed tank, but rather there's a little bit of glass poking through some of the ribbing that we see. Was sort of the intention there. Okay, so now on to number 2, and again, in the spirit of changing things up, this time I want to have more of a hump on the thorax, there, the back of the thorax, to further accentuate sort of that hunchback kind of vibe. But this time I put a little camera lens in there, presumably maybe there's somebody controlling this thing as it flies around. It's a little remote control mosquito or something like that. So this time the head is more of a basic, maybe it's a drill bit with a bit of a syringe at the end, a little needle at the end there. And then again, that would get sucked up into some tubes going into the thorax. But the back of the thorax is where we get our little camera for our navigator to see through. And again, when I say navigator, I don't mean like a pilot. I mean somebody controlling it with a remote control. As I moved away from the idea of those big heavy duty drills that you see on heavy equipment, I locked in pretty early that this was going to be presumably mosquito size, or maybe a little bit bigger. Some of these things, could you mold plastic in this kind of way at that kind of scale, at a scale that this is a real mosquito? I don't know, honestly. Probably not. Maybe we could do it with metal, but getting plastic molds that small, maybe we could do it, maybe not. I don't know. Definitely taking a lot of liberties with this project here, but it's just for fun, and it's just to sort of give you a rough idea of what you can do with this stuff. I say that pretty casually after the fact, but that kind of decision has to happen very early on. If this thing was actually heavy equipment, the design decisions would be very different. You'd have to worry about a person getting in and piloting this thing. Then you're worrying about doors, exhausts, lights, windows, mirrors. The scale is just super different. All sorts of stuff that I obviously didn't do. So that is a decision that happens when you're jotting down notes before you even really start sketching. On to number 3 here. So number 3, I'm putting a little bit of a camera lens on the head, and then, so this is riffing off of that second option again, but this time the camera is also just part of the head. And you'll see I start to really struggle with figuring out any kind of design here, and it's partly because it's from an awkward angle, but also I didn't really resolve the perspective too well when I did my sketch. I was a little too quick and loose with it, and when you go a little bit too quick like that, it causes these kind of problems where you sort of struggle with the design, and it's because you're struggling with perspective, and it behooves you to slow down at the beginning and try to figure out the perspective so that you don't run into this kind of issue. This is the kind of stuff that slows down progress. It will slow you down more than design decisions, I think. Anytime you're undoing and having to resolve things that you should have resolved earlier, that's when you start to slow down. Eventually I get it close enough to sort of get by for this example at least. this one really playing with the perspective and that hunch, you know, as you know, as this thing turns towards us, we're going to see less and less of that abdomen, but I do still want some of that in there to show off that design. It's pretty integral to what this thing does, to its function, so we do want that in there. And for better or worse, we'll just call that one good enough for now. And then we're not going to bother rendering or anything with this. We're going to keep it pretty quick. It's mostly about the sketches, but we'll slap on a little bit of color. So just colorizing the silhouettes. And now we're adding the darker sort of dark gray plastic that we see on some of the tools that we looked at in our reference board. Just trying to find, you know, hopefully a nice breakup of those different colors, find a nice balance. This is the kind of thing that personally I find I could just keep playing with. I could do variation after variation of just the different breakups and values and that kind of thing. I always sort of feel like there's probably a better option, but it's, you know, it's the possibilities of the unknown that keep the exploration going. But also that's sort of the nice thing about having multiple design options like this, is we can at least, you know, we can also change the coloration and that kind of thing on each one if we wanted to as well. Adding in a little bit of a lighter value as well, just another neutral kind of gray. Maybe it's a little bit of steel poking through here and there, just to break it up a little bit, show, I think it helps sort of sell some of the mechanics a little bit too. So this thing is not necessarily all plastic. There's a little bit of, you know, metal here and there. And then just deleting some of the silhouette where the glass would be poking through to the other side, and then filling in the glass as sort of an overlay. And then we're just about done. So a little bit of a shadow pass to help the forms read a little bit more. And a little bit of a light pass as well, for where some edges might be catching the light a little bit more, and we'll call that done. So hopefully that's a fun little exercise you can follow along with and design some stuff for yourself. Again, if you like this sort of thing, Tyler Edlin's class, The Fundamentals of Design at CGMA, goes into this sort of thing in much greater detail, so definitely check that out. The link will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching. Let us know in the comments what you'd like to see next, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.